The Google definition of poverty is described as the state of being extremely poor. The New Zealand Stats website collects data on child poverty and reports this as a child living in a household experiencing material hardship. A leading statistician, Jason Adderwell, describes material hardship as a way of measuring poverty by understanding what households don't do or don't have because of financial constraints. At the end of June 2018, New Zealand statistics on child poverty reported 13% of children lived in a household experiencing material hardship. For children, this can mean living in a household that doesn't have enough money to buy things like meat, fresh fruit, or vegetables, not having two pairs of shoes, or shoes that fit and warm clothing, or unable to pay for heating in the home, or doctors and dentist visits. In 2016, it was reported that 300,000 children were living in poverty in New Zealand. That is a large number for a small country like New Zealand. Globally, over 1.3 billion people are living in poverty. That is too many of us human beings having to suffer. Surveys have shown that 3 billion people, nearly half of the people in the world, have only the equivalent of $2.50 to spend each day. Think about how much money you would spend a day, and think about that $2.50 that people have to provide food, water, and shelter for themselves and their families. This is the reality people are living in at this very moment. Unfortunately, the media and politicians portray poverty in ways that blame the victims for the situation they find themselves in, such as spending money on things like gambling, alcohol, or tobacco, or having more children than they can support financially, single-parent households, or parents too lazy to find a job. Parents living in poverty do not necessarily waste their money on things like gambling, drugs, and alcohol. New Zealand Expenditure data shows that low-income households, or those receiving government benefits, spend less on alcohol, drugs, and tobacco, and gambling, and more of their income on food than higher-income households. There is no evidence that supports the myth that people living in poverty are reckless with their spending. Unfortunately, the media portrays extreme cases where this may be the reason, but should not be accepted as fact for the majority of people suffering. Poverty is not due to having too many children. Statistics show that 55% of children living in poverty are in households with only one or two children. Children in poverty are from both single-parent and two-parent households. 47% of children living in poverty are in two-parent households, and 45% are in sole-parent households. Even with both parents working, these families cannot afford to live above the poverty line. If a child was living in poverty, you wouldn't think much of them. You would just think they're in a state that they can't get out of, a terrible state. Well, that is true. They're in a horrible state, but that they can't escape from, forever, if you don't act. Their education being ruined, their futures being taken away from them. They can't have a normal life and graduate like a normal student, or be able to go to school and have fun with friends. Their future is demolished if you don't do anything to help them. Children living in poverty are more inclined to get sick or suffer from preventable diseases, such as rheumatic fever and skin complaints. Housing is an issue, as our rental and state housing is poor compared to many places in the world. It may not be dry, safe, or located in an appropriate place. Sometimes people choose their car as a dwelling instead of a house. The long-term consequences of poverty is as children get older, they are not as healthy as you and I, so they need to see the doctor more. Or they are not focused at school as they are hungry, so they don't get a good education and the cycle of poverty continues. For example, a 15-year-old autistic kid named Elijah Saitu has had to live in a damp hotel room for a whole 15 days next to a working KFC and a Denny's 24-hour takeaway. He's had to live by eating white bread, sardines, and having to watch old music videos as entertainment. He does not get the right nutrients in his food, nor the right stimulation his brain requires. When I went to Dunedin for a rugby tournament, as soon as I got out of the car, there was a lonely cold man on the side of the street, trying to cover as much of his body as he could. No food, no water, not enough resources to live a normal human being's life. You can help these poor people. You can make a change. We have to, or it will keep getting worse. more children will join poverty. A donation can make all the difference. Sponsoring a child, giving them the help they need. For example, KidsCan is a charity where you can sponsor a child in a school close to where we live, so the child can go to school every day with shoes, a raincoat, and lunch. In October this year, the government announced a massive $7.5 billion left over in their budget. How can New Zealand children go to school hungry when we have this much money not used? We are very lucky to be New Zealanders, and we should not have child poverty. Stopping poverty means that we are helping children have better lives and be great New Zealanders in the future.